Fallout has come a long way. What was once a cult classic computer role-playing game has become something of a cultural landmark within the gaming industry. Its iconic imagery of Vault Boys and power armor are instantly recognizable, but underneath its distinctive iconography lies a decidedly fractured core identity. Perhaps that shouldn't come as a surprise, as across its 5 major titles, the Fallout series has been developed by 4 different studios, and its rise to mainstream success has also given birth to one of the most divided and opinionated fanbases out there. You see, Fallout is a lot of things to a lot of people, which leads to the question, what should it be? And that is what this video is about. It will cover each major Fallout game in chronological order, examining their strengths and weaknesses while looking at what's changed over time both mechanically and narratively. Hearing that premise, you might think that this video will just be about hating on Bethesda and declaring old game good, new game bad, but I hope it'll be a lot more than that. I hope this will be a true analysis of the series that is also light on blame and heavy on introspection. In the end, you might not agree with some of my opinions on the series, but hopefully you'll still find this video interesting and have something new to consider about the Fallout series, its history, and its future. But before getting into that, a quick note on spoilers. I've tried to keep the majority of this video spoiler free, but there are some small plot details, later game footage, and side quest spoilers, so you should probably consider that this video will contain some mild spoilers for each game. There are also a few times when I go deeper into spoiler territory, but these will always be preceded by a warning and a timestamp in the video description for you to skip ahead. With that said, let's start at the beginning. Released in 1997, Fallout stood out then for the same reason it does today. The setting. Its atom punk retro-futuristic 1950s America-inspired alternative history combines the hope and optimism of technological promise and good old US of A flavoured patriotism with the lurking fears of nuclear annihilation and Cold War paranoia. In the world of Fallout, those fears turn out to be well-founded, for in the year of 2077, a global nuclear war brings humanity to its knees and reduces America to an irradiated ruin. Welcome to Fallout. While the individual stylistic choices are important to what we've come to know as Fallout, just the virtue of being post-apocalyptic made it somewhat unique. The role-playing video games of the 80s and 90s were heavily influenced by Dungeons & Dragons, and fantasy was very much the norm. That's what led to series founder Tim Kane's desire to go in a different direction. Originally conceived as a sequel to the 1988 post-apocalyptic role-playing game Wasteland, Fallout instead went on to become its own thing and draw inspiration from a wide range of largely untapped post-apocalyptic influences. But while it borrowed a lot of stylistic motifs and themes from other media, Fallout also understood what lies at the heart of the post-apocalyptic appeal. While fantasy is deliberately different from reality, the stuff of magic and imagination, post-apocalypses are far more grounded and relatable. If fantasy comes from some deep-seated dream that real life isn't quite interesting enough, then post-apocalypses represent our hidden fears that all that is good and taken for granted could one day come crashing down around us. In the 21st century, we know nuclear annihilation isn't right around the corner, but we still face occasional reminders that the possibility hasn't been removed completely. We know it's not likely, but we also know it is still possible. Maybe not tomorrow or even in 5 years, but in 68 years? Who knows? And that real uncertainty adds a degree of plausibility to the scenario presented by Fallout. What's more, the setting isn't some galaxy far, far away. It's a setting many people are deeply familiar with, America. And to see LA go from this to this feels strangely personal in a way Middle-earth or Westeros never will be. Fallout also offered role-playing scenarios that felt decidedly darker than most games that came before. There's no pretext of an epic conflict between good and evil that featured so prominently in other games. Instead, the good of the world ended when the bombs fell, and revealed an evil that's much more mundane. It's the evil that lurks underneath the surface of humanity, waiting to be exposed by an extreme situation like a nuclear holocaust. It's the capacity for greed and cruelty, the desire for power, the cold indifference to suffering, and the brutal reality of self-preservation in a world that pits man against man in a fight for survival. It's the evil we know, instead of the evil we imagine. The depiction of humanity in Fallout is bleak. Even those who mean well are shown as cold and distrusting. The settlements you find are meagre holdouts against the brutality of the wasteland, where each one seems to be barely holding things together. Each place you visit is plagued by its own problems, but still very few people who you meet are even prepared to ask for help, their distrust running so deep that they are unwilling to take a chance on an outsider. And of course, almost nobody is willing to help you. This depressing representation of our world in ruin is cleverly juxtaposed with the hopeful pre-war imagery of retrofuturism. Smiling Vault Boys, goofy robots, and an unwavering, misplaced faith in the power of nuclear technology. This contrast is deliberately ironic, but not to the point of being humorous. These symbols of the past only serve to heighten the tragedy of the present, and it is a tragedy. You see, that's the thing that Fallout 1 really understood, and which later games seem to forget. Any piece of post-apocalyptic fiction is inherently tragic. There can be comedy, but it cannot be a comedy, no matter how dark, because for a post-apocalypse to have meaning, what was lost has to be felt. This is something I'm going to come back to, but keep it in mind as we look more at the specifics of the first Fallout. The game begins with you creating a character and allocating your traits, skills, and special stats. There's more options than in later games, and what you choose has a big impact on how the game will play out, particularly in regards to your special stats. Each stat plays an important role, and low scores can really limit you in certain areas. For example, having a low intelligence will completely change your dialogue options to reflect your character's diminished mental capacity. Low strength will greatly reduce carry weight, but it might also stop you from effectively using any heavier equipment. Perception greatly impacts your accuracy with guns. Agility determines how much your character can do each turn, and so on. What's great about Fallout's character creation is that it gives you lots to choose from while making your choices feel like they really matter. The downside to this is, not all options are equal. You see, Fallout 1 isn't very balanced. There is such a thing as an optimal build. You will use some skills much more than others, and some traits are just objectively better. This is true to the spirit of its pen and paper roots, where it's more important to provide players with the freedom to make the choices they want to make than it is to make all choices equally valuable. And this philosophy applies to more than just the character creation in Fallout 1. But before you get to experience any of that other freedom, you have to get used to a few things, like the UI, moving around, and interacting with things. 1997 was quite a long time ago, and Fallout 1 feels pretty dated. It controls a bit more like a point-and-click adventure game than you might expect from an RPG. You right-click to toggle the cursor between moving and interacting, but it's how you choose what type of interaction to do that feels really weird. To do this, you need to right-click to change the cursor to interact, and then hold left-click to bring up the menu, and then move the mouse to the option you want before releasing. If that sounds hard to do, it's not. I'm likely just explaining it poorly. But if that sounds weird and clunky, well, it is. And it certainly takes a little bit of time to get used to for the inexperienced. Likewise, the UI and graphics also show their age. Generally, the UI is very functional, except for inventory management, which feels far slower and more cumbersome than it needs to be. It can also be confusing to know exactly how to interact with certain things in the game world, as some things require you to use the skill dex menu and some things require you to equip and then use certain items, and this isn't always made obvious to the uninformed. As for the graphics, the basic sprites and backgrounds are also aided by the player being able to inspect objects and people to see a description of them in the text box that can do a lot to add flavour to the world or provide you with key details. Combat is also not likely to sell you on the game. The first two Fallouts are turn-based, but they don't offer a whole lot of strategic depth. Combat is much more about seeing the impact of your character build and gear play out in front of you than it is a test of skill. You do need to decide how to allocate your action points, which involves knowing when to move and when to shoot or reload, and also factoring in distance and hit chance to make the most of your resources, but it's still pretty simple. You can find companions who will aid you, but you can't directly control them, or even provide any specific instructions, which can be a problem as it seems like the AI in this game has never considered that friendly fire might be undesirable in some situations. Combat can also feel slow. As you don't control your companions, you can find yourself waiting for multiple enemies and allies to take their turn while you wait for your chance to do something to come around again. And in certain fights, that can take a while. Luckily, you can change the combat speed to alleviate this, but overall, combat can seem lacking in strategic depth. Still, this is a game about much more than just combat, and the simplicity can at least make combat easy to understand. The game also has some nice sound effects to accompany gunfire, and some fantastic death animations that depict the various ways character sprites can be blown to pieces. And in a game with graphics this basic, these things go a long way to making combat feel enjoyable. The beginning of the game gives you some time to get to grips with the combat, the UI, and the controls. After creating your character, you'll learn that you're a member of Vault 13, who is being sent out by the Vault Overseer to find a water purification chip which is needed to ensure the Vault's future survival. Your instructions are brief, and it's not long until you find yourself in control outside the vault, with the door sealed behind and only the rats and an unidentified corpse for company. It's a lonely introduction to your upcoming adventure. Once you make your way out of the cave, you'll be introduced to the world map. It shows a whole new world that is completely unknown to both you and your character. You can travel to different locations and come across random encounters on the way, but what's most notable about the world map is how big it makes the world seem, and how real it makes the passage of distance and time. By comparison, the player feels very small and sometimes quite lost. The only direction you're given, beyond your initial instructions to find a water chip, is the location of another vault that might hold what you're looking for. Fallout 1 has very little handholding. In other games, a lack of handholding is often used to make the player need to work things out for themselves, which is rewarding, but there's another more obvious effect of this in Fallout 1. The lack of handholding communicates something about the world, that it is harsh and uncaring, and that you are completely and utterly on your own. You really do feel these emotions playing Fallout 1, but despite that, finding where to go or what to do isn't that hard. As long as you think about what you're doing, the game will subtly guide you down the correct path, although it never forces this path on you. You do have the freedom, if you wish, to skip big chunks of the game, or rush ahead to get the best items to completely trivialize combat, as well as the freedom to go the wrong way, to make bad decisions and to suffer the consequences of your mistakes. That freedom is important, and the developers also did a better job than most at extending that freedom to the quest design. Most quests will have multiple solutions, which often rely on your character having certain skill levels, making your character build feel important. And just as with the world design, it's again up to the player to think for themselves in order to work out what to do. A lot of the options you have during quests are things you'll never even realise, but that's what makes the times you do use your skill set to your advantage so rewarding. It's also worth mentioning that Fallout was designed to be played with the aid of the manual, which was lovingly crafted as a Vault-Tec issued survival guide that your character would have been given upon leaving Vault 13. This is a great way to make this information make sense within the context of the game, and it even goes as far as to include little scribbled on messages left to the player's character from the Vault Overseer that really helps sell this as part of the game rather than something completely external. Although don't worry, I'm not going to sit here and tell you how amazing game manuals were back in the day. Honestly, people like to romanticize them a little too much due to nostalgia, and for the most part, they're an inelegant and often ineffective way to deliver information to the player. But Fallout's manual was particularly well made, and it's also something new players should be aware of. It does contain the answers to a lot of the obvious questions. Anyway, as you continue to navigate the wasteland, you'll move from settlement to settlement, completing quests and picking up new leads on your search for the water chip. Eventually, this will lead you to Necropolis, the city of the dead, which is actually just a city of ghouls. I won't go into too much detail about the plot, but I do have to mention the atmosphere of this location, which is really well done. Necropolis isn't alone in this. The skeletal ruins of LA, now known only as the Boneyard, as well as the irradiated research facility known as the Glow, are also great examples. Fallout was an atmospheric game, thanks in large part to the ambient, industrial-sounding soundtrack that was used to create a sense of dread and unease as you explored these desolate landscapes. But this atmosphere was reinforced by all aspects of the game's design, from the moment you're kicked out of the safe haven of the vault, all the way up to the final cutscene. From the lack of handholding to the huge and barren world map, to the distrusting NPCs or the physically decaying ghouls. From the loneliness of finding your way on your own, to the sadness of seeing America in ruin, and the bleakness of witnessing the moral decay of what's left of humanity. As I said earlier, Fallout 1's world feels tragic, as all good works of post-apocalyptic fiction should be, and you really feel this playing the game. Still, nothing makes that more clear than the ending. But to talk about that, I need to talk about spoilers, so if you don't wish to have the ending to this game spoiled, check the video description for a timestamp to skip ahead. The Master is a great villain. His horrifying physical form and unnerving manner of talking make your encounter with him genuinely unsettling. Most disturbing of all, however, is how he represents an ideal that the player likely holds dear, that of pure logic and unwavering rationality, twisted to a complete extreme. The Master wishes to bring about something called the Unity, by forcibly mutating all remaining humans into super mutants. This way they'll be physically adapted to deal with the demands of the wasteland, while also being unified in purpose in a way that will avoid any events like the human-created war that led to the world becoming what it is today. The Master's rationality has made him completely uncaring to how many lives his plan will cost, or whether humans themselves want to be turned into subservient super mutants, who often lack even basic intelligence. But if you've gathered enough information and are willing to play the Master at his own game, you can, in true Fallout fashion, talk him down and avoid a violent confrontation by revealing a flaw in his plan, that the super mutants he has been producing are in fact sterile. Still, as great as the Master is, he wasn't what I wanted to talk about. No, the moment that truly captures the feeling of Fallout 1 is the final scene, when the player makes their triumphant return to Vault 13, having both saved the vault through finding a water chip, and then possibly saved all of humanity by stopping the Master's super mutant army. And your reward for this is to be exiled forever, because your heroic deeds and experience of the outside world could lead to instability for the vault, with other members wanting to leave and emulate your achievements. Despite all you've done, the survival of the vault is still more important than you. You see, Fallout 1 does have a happy ending for Vault 13. It just doesn't include you. For you, there is only the wasteland. It's a final reminder of what the world of Fallout is like. Unfair and uncaring. A ruinous wreck of what once was, and a place of tragedy.
Maybe the one who is waiting for you.
And therein lies Fallout 1's greatest achievement. It is thematically consistent. The game design, the mechanics, and the plot all help to reinforce the feelings this post-apocalyptic world is trying to evoke in the player. Fallout 1 isn't a long game. If quantity of content factors into the equation, then Fallout 1 is far surpassed by Fallout 2 or New Vegas. Fallout 1 isn't really a game that's all that mechanically deep either, at least not when it comes to combat, and the UI and controls feel far more dated than they should. The multiple solutions to quests, or the ending slides that make all the players' actions in the game feel like they have consequence, are both very impressive for a game from 1997, but they've also been done by many other games since, and they're not enough to make Fallout 1 really stand out anymore. But the consistency of its themes, the incredible sense of atmosphere, and the overall tightness of the experience, these things are what make the first Fallout one of the greats. And now seems a good time to return to that original question of what should Fallout be. By now, it is probably pretty obvious that I like Fallout 1 quite a lot. Having replayed all 5 of the main games over the last few months, I think I can finally say that this is my favourite game in the series. But the irony of the situation is that playing these games back to back also makes it pretty obvious that Fallout 1 is the least Fallout game. You might say that's a silly thing to say. How can the original be the least representative? The thing is, it goes back to what I said in the introduction. Fallout is a lot of things to a lot of people, and the Fallout that most people know and want isn't the Fallout of the first game. Most Fallout fans haven't even played this game, and even among old school fans I think there are probably more people who prefer the second game to the first. So what should Fallout be? To me, it should be like the first game, at least in narrative consistency and tone, but I'm not so sure that's what other people want or expect, because Fallout has come to be defined by other things I'll talk more about later in this video. But I should point out, those things are often still there in Fallout 1. The retro-futuristic stylings, the 1940s pop songs, Deathclaws, Nuka-Cola, Mr. Handies, they're all there, they just play much smaller roles. Fallout 1 also has a very clear camp side to it. It should be pretty obvious when you look at the 9-foot-tall green supermutants, or the various giant insects. There is a schlocky B-movie vibe to the monsters you face in this game, and if that wasn't enough, if you're unsuccessful in the game, you can end up getting a game over where you're dipped in a big vat of goo that will turn you into a supermutant. There is a camp side to it all, it's just a small one. Just like there is plenty of humour and irony, and several pop culture references, but they're quite understated. They never feel like they get in the way of the emotions the game is trying to evoke, and the post-apocalyptic wasteland itself is always taken seriously, to the point that it's almost oppressively bleak and depressing. So what's changed with Fallout? I know what you're thinking. Bethesda. But not so fast. You see, there's this one thing that the anti-Bethesda narrative always seems to just brush over and forget. And it's called Fallout 2.
Give me a kiss to build a dream on in my imagination.
Released just 1 year after the first game, the rapid development time for Fallout 2 is impressive in its own right. While graphically and mechanically similar to its predecessor, Fallout 2 still managed to completely dwarf it in the amount of content it offered, with more places to go, more things to do, and far more factions to interact with. Fallout 2 also moved forwards in time, where the first game was set in 2161, approximately 84 years after the bombs fell. Fallout 2 takes place in 2241, meaning another 80 years have passed, and this is reflected in the game's setting. Fallout 1 showed humanity barely clinging on to life in the ruins of a dead world. Fallout 2, however, shows a humanity that is well on its way to being rebuilt, whether in the image of what came before, in the case of a new Californian Republic, or through the elitist hierarchy of Vault City, or the Temple of Vice that is New Reno, or the Kung Fu and Scientology-infested San Francisco. But we'll come back to that later. To Fallout 2's credit, there is something very ambitious and impressive about the scale and scope of its world. With this jump in time and size also comes a new focus: politics. Where Fallout 1 often looked at the concept of survival at an individual level, Fallout 2 looks at the survival of the group and the clashes of ideology and identity that comes with this. It's a good fit for a role-playing game that wants to explore the concept of morality in a post-nuclear world, and the player is given enough freedom and power to really feel like they are making a difference at impacting the way in which this world is evolving. Overall, the focus on politics is well done, with factions having realistic motives and attention given to the realities of trade routes and resources, which adds to the believability. But while the politics of the world creates an interconnected web, the design of the game seems to have been more fractured. In an interview with Eurogamer, lead designer and director of Fallout 2, Fergus Urquhart, said this.
What we did back then, particularly with like Fallout and the other games, was we sort of like say, hey, you're the New Reno guys, right? And they were just New Reno. Like they were kind of got to be like, so you had these very small, like 2, maybe 3 people at the most, that were responsible for a whole part of the game. And a lot of times they just worked on that whole part of the game for months, you know, and with, to be honest, not a whole lot of supervision.
The difference between that and Fallout 1 was on Fallout 1, it seemed like everybody was working on everything all the time.
The lack of supervision and disconnected approach mentioned here stand out to me, as there are times when Fallout 2 really seems to show this. What's more, series founder Tim Kaine and several other key figures behind the first game left Interplay in early 1998 to form Troika Games. Regardless whether because of a change in staff, the fractured development approach, or just the short time frame the team had to work with, Fallout 2 ended up decidedly less consistent than its predecessor and marked a distinct shift in tone. Fallout 2 is still thoroughly dark, and when looking at the presence of mature themes like slavery, drug addiction and prostitution, Fallout 2 was arguably the much more adult of the two games. But while Fallout 2 was dark, it wasn't quite as bleak as the first game. The atmosphere had changed, and the depressing or oppressive qualities of the first game no longer come through. Instead, there was a larger focus on humour. It's often quite dark humour, but it still marked a shift from Fallout 1, where the wasteland was always taken seriously, to a more mixed tone where the wasteland was sometimes made fun of. There was also a lot of pop culture references. Fallout 1 also had a lot of references, but in a GDC talk, Tim Kaine said they had a rule for these, that if the player doesn't get them, they shouldn't even know that a joke or a cultural reference was being made. Apparently, this rule did not continue on to Fallout 2, because there are plenty of moments that feel far too in your face, like the Monty Python bridge scene. These references can be very immersion breaking, and even if you do get them, they still feel out of place. There's also a number of questionable inclusions that just feel unrealistic. For example, in one quest you meet and interact with a ghost, but at least that's only in a side quest. In the main story, you interact with a group of talking, intelligent Deathclaws. You also receive these kinds of telepathic visions from your tribal shaman, so he can tell you not to forget about the main story quest. There's no explanation for this, it's just tribal magic. This happens more than once and as a part of the main story quest, and it's honestly worse than any single thing from the later games in terms of realism. It's fine that radiation can cause mutations, but magic? Really? These examples highlight the lack of cohesion, and this also extends to parts of the world building. The world of Fallout 2 has been described as a theme park, and that's quite fitting, because certain areas do have clear themes. For example, the settlement of Redding is themed after the Wild West. When you go here, you can become a sheriff and get to play around with enforcing the law. There's also a gold mine. Why do people bother mining gold in a post-apocalypse is something you're not told, and it just seems like the decision to include a gold mine was because it fits with the Wild West theme. However, San Francisco is an even worse example. It's Kung Fu themed, complete with a showdown between Kung Fu rivals and also an emperor. It's also the home to a faction called the Hubologists, who are a parody of Scientology and come with their very own version of Tom Cruise. To Fallout 2's credit, a parody of Scientology in 1998 is very ahead of its time, but it's still not Fallout. Nothing about San Francisco is. The entire city feels poorly thought out and out of place. The approach to the world design isn't all bad though. To see the good side of it, you just have to look at New Reno. While it doesn't have as interesting a backstory as the NCR, or the conflicted morality of Vault City, if Fallout 2 is a theme park, New Reno is its most exciting ride. The wasteland's capital of sin is home to a number of casinos and crime families. You can get involved in the gang warfare and work your way up to being a made man as you hinder and take out your rivals. But you can also work as a porn star, or a fluffer if you're lacking in credentials, as well as become a boxing champion, have an affair with a mob boss's lonely wife, or uncover the secrets to the drug trade. New Reno is a hive of depravity, which the game lets you partake in as much or as little as you like, and it's fun to have that freedom and get the chance to live this lifestyle. It's not the most realistic location in the wasteland, particularly not when you come across katana-wielding yakuza fighting mafia men equipped with Tommy guns, but it is entertaining, and when considered as a role-playing experience rather than a post-apocalyptic experience, there are plenty of ways in which Fallout 2 wins out over the first game by offering a bigger world with much more to do. It also comes with more guns, more armor, more perks, and more companions. These companions now have more fleshed out backstories, sometimes with actual voice acting and facial modelling, and can also be given instructions on how to behave in combat now. Companions have also had their trading and equipment systems improved, and you can now push them out of your way, which, unfortunately, you will have to do a lot because despite all the companion improvements, they still love to block doorways. Outside of that, much of what was good in the first game is still good here. The character building and RPG systems are much the same and still work well. For how many more quests there are in this game, there isn't much of a decrease in quality, and combat is still simple but functional, although there's much more of it now, so you are more likely to get bored of it by the end of the game. As for the story, it's surprisingly similar in basic premise. Where in the first game you searched for a water chip to save your vault, now you are searching for something called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit in order to save your tribal village. The tribal theme itself feels somewhat underutilized. It may have been interesting to explore the differences between civilized and tribal communities in this post-nuclear landscape, but very little is done with this idea. Also, the game's opening and tutorial dungeon are a real chore. As for the ending, well, spoiler warning, check the video description for a timestamp to skip ahead if you don't want part of the ending revealed. The Enclave are an interesting antagonist, even if they don't quite live up to the standards set by the Master. However, I think there's a big problem with the ending. No matter what you do, there will always be a happy ending where you become the hero of your people and your village prospers. This contrasts with the first game that was bittersweet, where no matter what you did, the happy ending would never actually include you. And this reflects a shift in tone of Fallout 2 overall. Still worse than this is there's no difference between high karma and low karma endings anymore, and the ending for your village always involves saving it with the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, even if you never find or pick one up. At least the end slides are still here. In fact, they're better than ever as the large number of locations and more complicated politics of Fallout 2 makes your actions feel even more impactful. But that overly happy main ending never quite sat right with me. Despite being so similar graphically and mechanically, Fallout 2 really feels like a different game to its predecessor. While clearly not as tight or consistent, it can be argued that Fallout 2 makes up for this in terms of scale and amount of content. Still, it's hard to deny that there is also a shift in tone. If Fallout 1 was a tragedy, then Fallout 2 feels much more like a dark comedy, and which of those you prefer is up to you. The things that are lost, the bleakness, the loneliness, the depressing side, have been traded for pure entertainment. More jokes, more references, more satire, and more sheer variety. But the problem is, a lot of the realism and immersion are lost along the way, and despite Fallout 2's other strengths, that particular sacrifice doesn't feel worth it. But despite that, the freedom and depth of the game are still there, and Fallout 2 does try its hardest to entertain you, and it's often successful. It's still a great game in its own right, but if we're to look at how Fallout as a series has changed, the role of Fallout 2 needs to be acknowledged, because while Bethesda will move the series even further away from its more serious roots, it was Fallout 2 which started the series down this path. And maybe it was okay for Fallout to change. After all, the wasteland itself had changed, and perhaps a shift in tone to reflect that makes sense, and it's just that Fallout 2 didn't quite handle that shift as well as it should have. But change in itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. A sequel doesn't have to evoke the exact same emotions of what comes before, and maybe the series was meant to explore different things as it went along. Maybe that was meant to be the point, and maybe there was a plan to the series' direction that this was following, where the wasteland and the world before it stop being things of importance as the series moves forwards to look at the continual evolution of this brave new world. But if that was the plan, it was about to hit a major bump, because in December 2003, Interplay Entertainment went bankrupt. Black Isle Studios was subsequently closed down, and the then Fallout 3, also known by its codename of Van Buren, which was quite far along in development, was cancelled. Enter Bethesda.
I don't want to set the world on fire.
On July the 12th, 2004, Interplay announced that they had sold the Fallout license to Bethesda. The antagonistic relationship between old Fallout fans and Bethesda started soon after, and it's never really gone away. Of course, it's unlikely that it's still the same people holding on to a grudge all these years later, but the sentiment behind it continues to live on. It just mutated its exact form as it was passed on from generation to generation. all of the Fallout 3 vs New Vegas, or New Vegas vs Fallout 4, or Fallout 76 vs literally everyone. All of these discussions are to some degree built on that same foundation. The idea that Fallout is in the wrong hands, and its owners don't know what they're doing. So how did this all start? Well, I think it's safe to say that older Fallout fans were protective of their cherished series, but there were several things going on at that time that didn't help matters. It had only been a few months since Black Isle Studios' Fallout 3, Van Buren, had been scrapped, and Van Buren was far enough along that people had seen gameplay footage and got their hopes up. Also, 1 month after that, the action RPG Fallout Brotherhood of Steel released to low review scores and represented a move in a direction that no one wanted the series to go. And finally, Troika Games, the game studio founded by Tim Kaine and other Fallout veterans that was behind classic RPGs such as Arcanum and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, had also tried to get the license of Fallout from Interplay, only to be outbid by Bethesda. For many fans, Troika were the next best hope for the series after Black Isle were closed down. When the announcement that Bethesda had acquired the rights to the series was made, fans responded by voicing worry that instead of a true sequel, they'd get Morrowind with guns. In fact, so many people voiced concern about the series' future on Bethesda's official forums that they temporarily straight up banned all discussion of the game in what was likely a poorly thought out move. But a continued skepticism from older fans of the series persisted all the way up to Fallout 3's release in 2008. And the hostility towards Bethesda and their handling of the series continues to this day. In fact, it's probably at an all-time high right now. But it's also become an important part of Fallout's history that I think has played a role in shaping the series. But I'll come back to that in a bit. For now, let's look at the actual game. A lot of the changes Fallout 3 makes are obvious. The isometric perspective is gone, which is understandable. Combat is action-based rather than turn-based, which would be much less of a problem if Fallout 3's combat was actually good, but instead it feels basic and unsatisfying. Guns feel weak with little recoil, almost everything is hit scan, and enemy AI is happy to just stand out in the open taking bullets to the face. Still, combat is at least accessible, and standards for action RPGs were pretty low in the past. Also gone is exploring the world through a map. It's now one open area that can be traversed in real time, but the added immersion this brings and the capacity for strong environmental storytelling end up being one of Fallout 3's biggest strengths. Really though, with Fallout 3, Bethesda stuck to what they knew, and the game design reflects that. In order to fit Fallout into their style of open world, some things had to be different. The wasteland of Fallout 1 and 2 showed vast expanses of flat, empty deserts, but to replicate that would lead to the world design being visually uninteresting and boring to move through. Instead, Fallout 3's wasteland is densely packed with rock and rubble. Ruined buildings are plentiful, and their charred remains combine with the blackened trees and distant collapsing freeways to create these eerily skeletal vistas that seem to symbolize the death and slow decay of the old world. Fallout 3 may not be very technically impressive by today's standards, and the character models and animations were nothing special even back then, but the environmental design still stands out today. The ruinous imagery makes the state of the world clear, and destruction and loss are evident anywhere you look. It is ugly. There's a distinct lack of colour, and the yellowy green filter is somewhat visually off-putting. But then, Fallout's world should be a pretty ugly place. Most of all, however, the visual design shows an understanding of the tone of Fallout. What's unfortunate is that this understanding doesn't stretch to the writing. While the pop culture references of the second game are mostly gone, and the humour is still dark, Fallout 3 also adds a constant layer of quirkiness that shows its head everywhere you go. One of the clearest examples of this is Moira Brown, who tasks the player with assisting her to create a wasteland survival guide. Moira's demeanour is cartoonishly eccentric and cheerful. Her inability to understand danger suggests a level of common sense less than that of a young child, and every single pointlessly dangerous task you're given is accompanied by the same over-the-top dialogue, making fun of it all. Isn't it silly? You almost died walking over landmines to test what happens. Who could have thought they explode? Now go get radiation sickness so we can see if anything cool happens. And despite my impression of it, I don't even think the quality of the writing is that bad for what it is. But even in Fallout 2, the silliness of it all would be woefully out of place. And the message of Moira and her Wasteland survival guide is crystal clear. Surviving in the wasteland is a joke now. And it really is. At Canterbury Commons, you find two people pretending to be superheroes, acting out some childish rivalry. The Ant Agonizer is able to control giant ants, because of course she can. At Oasis, a group of people worship Harold as a god, even though he tells them he's just a ghoul. Oh, and Harold is also a tree now, who has also somehow travelled from one side of America to the other for unknown reasons. Huh, so random. In Blood Ties, you meet some people LARPing as vampires. Pretend vampires who just want to live off blood and also be pacifists. There are several of these people, yet none of them seem to realise how stupid this all is. At Little Lamplight, you find a town of only children, because nothing would go wrong with a town being run by children, right? In Megaton, people worship an active nuclear bomb while drinking the irradiated water surrounding it, because I'm sure in a world full of radiation, no one ever worries about radiation sickness. I hear radiation sickness is a bit of a laugh anyway. I mean, slow, agonizing death, cancerous tumours, skin peeling off. What's not to like there? Am I the only one with a problem with this stuff? I've seen a lot of criticism directed towards realism and world building in this game. What do they eat? One man once rightfully questioned. That and all the other inconsistencies people have pointed out aren't wrong, but I find it hard to care about this stuff in the first place because what realism is there anyway when nobody acts real in the first place? And this is a problem with everyone in the game, not just the scenarios I already mentioned. I said earlier that in Fallout 1 everyone is cold, nobody trusts an outsider, and even those who need help are scared to ask. Not so anymore. Everyone wants to talk to you, everyone trusts you, everyone wants to tell you a story or give you a quest. Even the bad guys of this world just want to sit down with a stranger, enjoy a drink, and force you to listen to their dastardly plans about nuking Megaton just for the lols. And that's another thing that's been lost. Any sense of moral complexity. I suppose it makes sense, seeing as how cartoonish the world is, that moral dilemmas should therefore be completely black and white, with only one or two real exceptions like Tenpenny Tower. But the dichotomy between over-the-top evil and complete goody two-shoes doesn't feel like it should have a place in a post-apocalypse. If Fallout is meant to explore the morality of a post-nuclear world, well, this isn't it. This is just wacky scenarios designed for entertainment. This is Oblivion with guns. But at least in Oblivion it sort of made sense, because that game was clearly trying to be light-hearted, and it could get away with feeling like it was parodying generic fantasy tropes, because those generic fantasy tropes weren't meant to be the main selling point. But that's not true for Fallout. It was a post-apocalyptic role-playing game. That was its main draw, not being a wacky world full of funny adventures. The tone of Fallout 3 reminds me of another game series, Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is satirical. It's not trying to provide cutting-edge commentary on the dangers of a life of crime, it's trying to make fun of reality. The world of GTA is meant to be a joke. It's often clever and enjoyable, but what it has to offer is something very different to, say, The Wire. So which of these is Fallout meant to be exactly? Either we're meant to take the wasteland seriously, or it's meant to be a joke. You can't have both. Either the nuclear annihilation of humanity is a tragedy, or it's just something to laugh at. Either radiation sickness is horrifying, or it's funny. Either people are meant to act realistically, or they're meant to be cartoon characters. And while you might say, Fallout has always featured comedy, it has, but there's a big difference between having jokes and being a joke. Grand Theft Auto's America is a joke. What is Fallout's Wasteland meant to be? I don't think Bethesda have an answer to this question. The thing is, Fallout 3 shows they can do a pretty good job at being a post-apocalyptic Grand Theft Auto, at least in terms of narrative and tone. There isn't anything wrong with wacky, there's nothing wrong with fun. This is when Bethesda's writing feels like it's at its best anyway, but if that's what they want to do with Fallout, then they should just commit to that and drop any pretense that this is an emotionally mature and serious experience. As I said already, you can't do both at once, at least not successfully. Okay, I'll move on from this point. I think I might have spent too long on it already, and there's more to Fallout 3 than just this. And really, a lot of it isn't that bad, starting with character creation. It's undeniably streamlined. Talents are gone, skills are reduced, and perks are less impactful. Special stats are still here, but they're way less important than before. Take strength. In Fallout 1 and 2, your base carry weight is 25, and each point in strength increases this by another 25. In Fallout 3, your base carry weight is 150, and each point of strength increases this by just 10. There's a huge difference already, but there's also less perks based on high strength, and the complete removal of weapons having strength requirements to use. Other stats show similar changes. Skills are a bit better because what's been removed wasn't that important, and most of the skills that are left at least still feel useful in game. Some more than others, but the balance isn't that bad. The biggest problem with skills is it takes way too little time to have enough points in everything you want, meaning you rarely end up feeling very specialised, or like your build is a unique reflection of your character. There are also plenty of skill checks and conversations, mostly for speech itself, but often for other skills and stats too. The number of skill checks is great, but their actual writing is usually poor, and so is their execution. The dialogue indicator and the way the game almost always rewards these options more than normal dialogue options makes them feel like free win buttons, which feels particularly unearned in some of the later story examples. Fallout always had ways to avoid confrontation through speech, but it was never made so obvious or so easy. But at least your choices in character builds have real effects on the game still. Overall, these choices are less impactful than before, and the differences between builds is a lot smaller, but there are still choices and they do still have meaning. Quest design isn't so different. The multiple solutions that were so important to past Fallouts return, mostly. There's more quests now and there is a greater focus on dungeons, but the designers have clearly tried to add multiple solutions where possible, and the marked side quests feel fairly high quality. However, just like with character building and speech checks, everything's too easy now, and that's what separates Fallout 3 from what came before. Take the quest Oasis, where you meet Harold. Talking to Harold reveals that he's unhappy and wants you to help kill him. Then, after you exit the conversation with Harold, you immediately see his followers arguing and are then approached by Father Birch, who asks you to spare Harold but use his ointment to stop his growth, and once that conversation ends, Mother Laurel starts talking to you and asks you to also spare Harold but use her ointment to accelerate his growth. Then you go through a generic cave, get to Harold's underground heart, and click it, where you can pick option A, option B, or option C from a menu. I hope you can see the problem here. You have 3 different options, but each one is completely unmissable. And then to carry these options out, you just choose from a menu at the end. Different solutions to a quest should be up to the player to discover. I think more of the fun is in the discovery than the actual choice part in the older Fallouts. But with the addition of quest markers and quest design that has zero faith in the player's intelligence, discovering what to do yourself is pretty much non-existent. As for carrying out each different solution, you literally just pick from a menu. What is challenging or satisfying about that? I suppose this quest is supposed to present a moral dilemma, and to its credit, it's not as black and white as most. But of the 3 choices, siding with Harold makes far more sense than the others. He is in chronic pain and shows enough autonomy to be allowed to decide his future. The other alternatives are helping literal crazy people who think Harold's a god, yet despite that refuse to listen to a word he says. Regardless of what you choose though, there are no actual consequences at all, it just decides which reward you get. And, surprise surprise, siding with Harold gives you by far the best reward, almost as if the designers knew every player would pick this option. Oh, and you can also burn Harold to death when you first meet him in case you want an over-the-top evil option. There's no reward or reason for the player to do this other than doing evil for the sake of evil, but at least the player has the option, I guess. Overall, this isn't a bad quest, that's not why I'm picking on it, but this quest does exemplify Fallout 3's quest design. It's good that multiple solutions are still a thing, but the way in which they're executed is very different. Everything's too easy now, everything's just handed to you. Just follow the quest marker and pick those obvious options. There's no need to think for yourself, and that's disappointing. And speaking of disappointing, I guess the main story at least needs to be mentioned. It's not all bad. Contrary to everyone else, I actually like the opening section. It does last a bit too long, but showing what life is like inside of the vault is a good idea, and Fallout 3's Vault 101 actually seems a bit easier to believe than the much smaller Vault 13 of Fallout 1. I find it easier to accept that a self-sustaining society could actually live down here than in here. Also, the moment you exit the vault is very well done. After this, you'll spend a while looking for your father, which takes you through a lot of the Capital Wasteland's important areas, although the quest design can feel too linear. The ending is also weak, and there's a very noticeable lack of ending slides the series was previously known for. But there are at least a few good moments before you get to that disappointing ending, like the Tranquility Lane simulation or exploring Vault 87. The problem with the main story is to do with the lore, but I think the cause of this problem is actually quite different to what many people have suggested. You see, it's often said that Bethesda didn't understand the lore of the previous games, or just didn't care about staying true to it, and I think both of these are false. Bethesda may not have understood the tone of the past games, but they did understand the lore, and they tried to stay faithful to it. In fact, they tried to stay way too faithful to it and ended up delivering something that seems like pure fan service. It's lazy, unoriginal, and uninteresting, but I think the reasons they went in this direction was because they tried too hard to please fans. I guess it goes back to that antagonism I described at the start of this section. People make it seem like Bethesda were just being cavalier, only caring about making money, and too lazy to do proper research. In short, that they cared too little. In truth, I think they cared too much, and it made them scared. They lacked the confidence to do their own thing, to believe in their own ability to create something original, so instead they tried to just shove in every fan favourite. The Brotherhood, the Enclave, Super Mutants, Water Purification, Gex, Volts, Deathclaws, Rad Scorpions, Mr. Handy's, Nuka-Cola, 1940s pop music, everything's here. Bethesda was so worried about fan reaction that they put in all the individual things fans liked. They were so worried people wouldn't accept their Fallout as the real Fallout, they made Fallout as Fallout-esque as possible, leading it to feel a bit like a parody of its former self. But I don't believe there was any kind of malice behind this at all, just incompetence. Good intentions and incompetence. It's a combination as old as time. It is sad though because Fallout 3's main story feels completely wasted. One of the themes of Fallout 3 is nostalgia. It crops up in multiple side quests, like in Head of State, Agatha's Song, or Stealing Independence, and this works well with the 1940s music or retro future stylings. Still, it seems a bit odd how the inhabitants of the Capital Wasteland are so focused on the past, particularly when in Fallout 1 and 2 the pre-war world seems largely forgotten. It is now 200 years since the bombs fell, and you would have thought these people would have moved on. But overall, it's an interesting theme that could have been given a greater focus. It's also a theme that would have worked much better if the game was only set earlier. I'm sure they wanted to set Fallout 3 after 2, so it would seem more like a real sequel. But the radiated water and lack of vegetation, the visual design of the world, the fact that locations are still full of useful loot, and the way in which Megaton and Rivet City look like recent constructions compared to the NCR or Vault City, all these things would have made much more sense if the game was just set closer to the Great War. Instead, the nostalgia in Fallout 3 just seems a little out of place. There is some small degree of irony too, that just like the inhabitants of the Capital Wasteland, Bethesda were likewise too focused on nostalgia, at looking at the past for inspiration. But I think ultimately they failed to take any of the right lessons from it. They took all of the iconography, all of the names, all the symbols, but they lost so much of their meaning. I suppose this is where I should say something like, Fallout 3 is still a good game, just a bad Fallout game. But I won't. That feels a little too cliché even for me. Still, despite how negative this section has been, I do like Fallout 3, and I still had fun replaying it. Public opinion seems to have finally started to turn against this game in recent years, but it was still a huge critical and commercial success. It won several Game of the Year awards and made Fallout mainstream. A lot of people loved this game, and I understand why. It offered a huge world full of content, where you were free to go where you please, and it always feels like there's more to do. Fallout 3's dungeons are an improvement on Oblivion's more copy and pasted design, and Bethesda's environmental storytelling is still well done. Exploring some of the abandoned vaults and uncovering their mysteries is still very atmospheric and memorable, and it's times like these that Fallout 3 is at its best. There are plenty of valid reasons to like and enjoy this game. I just personally have a hard time overlooking its flaws. And, unfortunately for the Fallout series, things are going to get a whole lot worse in the future. But not before they get better.
Yippee-yay, there'll be no wedding bells for today.
Developed in just 18 months, New Vegas saw the reins of the Fallout series move from the hands of Bethesda to Obsidian Entertainment, a company founded by several of the Black Isle Studio developers who had originally worked on the Fallout series. Built using the same Gamebryo engine as Fallout 3, New Vegas looks and plays very similarly to the previous entry in the series, and also comes with a lot of the same flaws. The visuals, the animation quality, the gunplay, these all exhibit a lot of the same problems. Add in an even larger number of bugs at release than is normal for a Bethesda title, and the lower Metacritic score of New Vegas will start to make sense. At a glance, it didn't look like a step up from what came before, but what a cursory glance doesn't show is the improvements to writing and quest design that New Vegas brought to the table. Set back on the west coast of America, New Vegas continues to tell the story of the world seen in the first games. Where Fallout 1 showed humanity just starting to rebuild, Fallout 2 showed what societies these construction efforts might yield. Fallout New Vegas goes one step further and shows what might happen when one dominant society crosses paths with another, when the ever-expanding New Californian Republic finally meets their match in Caesar's Legion. This conflict sets a stage that all the drama of New Vegas plays out on, and the shift of focus that comes with this feels very fitting for the series. The coming war is reflected everywhere in New Vegas' world. Every person you meet seems to have an opinion on those involved, and everywhere you turn, you'll find signs of the war effort. Patrols walk the roads, outposts scatter the horizons, and degenerates are nailed to crosses. Innocents are mercilessly slaughtered. It's a far cry from the completely ruined world of Fallout 3, where nameless raiders seem to make up the vast majority of the actual population. New Vegas does have some raiders, but they exist within their own factions that come with their own bases and motivations, like the Fiends or the Powder Gangers. Hell, if you go to these bases, you'll even see living quarters, and if you can convince them not to kill you, you can even talk to them and hear about their problems with supplies or rival factions. The world of New Vegas indicates a whole lot more care has been put into creating a sense of logical cohesion to how its inhabitants' lives function. Farms, trade routes, power supplies, defense, these things are all accounted for, and that makes this world feel far more believable. The more functional approach means there's less focus on crafting the post-apocalyptic dungeons that were so common in Fallout 3. Instead, they're more occasional, and New Vegas' Mojave Desert is a lot less densely packed than the capital wasteland. Visually, this makes it look emptier. It's a more realistic look for sure, and it's also much more similar to what was seen in the older games, but it's not very aesthetically striking. The green UI and filter have been switched out for orange, making the dominant colour go from grey to brown, which I guess gives New Vegas its own visual style, but it's hardly an interesting one. And the environmental design remains one area where Fallout 3 feels clearly superior. The Mojave can also be surprisingly restrictive at times, despite its apparent openness, as the strategic placement of mountains often forces players through specific routes and hinders their ability to roam the wastes in whichever direction they please. But if you can get past the occasional annoying mounting range and visual design, New Vegas' world offers a much more engaging story. Fallout 3's side quests and locations generally functioned as self-contained parts of the wasteland, but New Vegas' focus on politics and factions makes its quests feel a lot more connected to the central conflict of a region. This means there's less need for wacky scenarios to provide the entertainment, as quests are given meaning through their relevance to the wider plot. You'll work with or against factions both big and small as you earn or lose favour. There's a lot of agency provided to the player to influence events, but where Fallout 3 often asked simple, isolated moral questions, New Vegas introduces concepts of morality for its factions. You're no longer asked whether you want to go with the good option or the bad option. Instead, you'll need to consider the ideologies and motivations of the groups you encounter to decide in what ways you want to work with or against them. It's a much more realistic way of allowing the player to explore moral concepts in a post-nuclear world. New Vegas isn't just better at providing choice though, there's also a lot more consequence. Stepping on enough toes will lead you to being treated as hostile by the game's major factions. What's more, as you progress further through the main story and faction questlines, events between the NCR and the Legion will start to come to a head. In the upcoming showdown, you'll be asked to pick a side, but you'll also find lots of opportunities to cash in on your past favours, to ease over tensions or win smaller groups to your cause. It all comes together surprisingly well, and while several games have tried to copy this style of faction-focused storytelling, one of which we'll be looking at very soon, none of them have come close to doing it so successfully. The factions and quest design are helped by the solid writing. As you'll spend a lot more of your game time reading dialogue, as opposed to the more constant dungeon crawling of 3, it's good that this dialogue feels well written, and is often entertaining. In terms of tone, it's much closer to Fallout 2 than 1, with the wasteland being very dark, but rarely coming across as that bleak. However, where Fallout 2 frequently goes too far, particularly with its references, New Vegas instead feels like the writers have learned from past mistakes, making its humour feel much more restrained. The same can be said for the wackiness of Fallout 3. New Vegas has some of this, but it's nowhere near as frequent, and there's often explanations. Like for why the Freeside gang, the Kings, all dress up and act like Elvis. There's at least some reason provided, and while things like this don't exactly feel grounded in reality, it's at least easier to buy than something like, why did the inhabitants of Megaton decide to build their settlement around an undetonated nuclear bomb that's leaking radiation? New Vegas also manages to make a lot of its jokes through being clever or witty, where Fallout 3 often just falls back on being silly.
They asked me if I knew anything about power plants. I said as much as anyone I had ever met. They asked me how well I understood theoretical physics. I said I had a theoretical degree in physics. They said, welcome aboard.
Meaning the humour doesn't come at as high a cost to immersion. In summary, New Vegas manages to have a more consistent tone than Fallout 2 or 3. It's not the same tone as Fallout 1, but it also doesn't take the humour or wackiness so far that it undermines the story's serious aspects. And that middle ground between serious and fun is likely what the majority of the fans want from the series at this point. As for the RPG mechanics and character building, New Vegas is very similar to Fallout 3. Some old fan favourites, like the talent system and the low intelligence dialogue options, make their return, and skill checks occur more frequently and are generally better implemented than in 3. But your character build is still a lot less important than in the first 2 games, and you can still get every important skill to a high enough level fairly quickly, allowing you to be good at everything. This hurts replay value a bit, but the open quest design and constant faction choices end up giving New Vegas more replayability than most RPGs. And so New Vegas manages to be both a good RPG and a good Fallout game. It does still have all of the gameplay and visual problems of Fallout 3 though. Depending on the player, these can be big roadblocks to your enjoyment, and if you specifically want something that can be played like a Bethesda game, go anywhere and always find things to do, then New Vegas can end up feeling like an inferior clone. But if you want an RPG with player agency and choice and consequence, there's no contest. New Vegas still feels a little rushed, a little lacking in polish, and a little rough around the edges, but these flaws are often explained away by the short development time and the nature of the Gamebryo engine. This makes for a convenient narrative where everything good about the game can be credited to Obsidian and everything bad is just inherited from Bethesda. I understand this narrative, but it's always seemed a bit strange to me how Obsidian are just given a free pass for all the bugs, when Obsidian have made quite a few games, and spoilers, New Vegas isn't the only one that was pretty buggy. But Obsidian's take on the Fallout world clearly resonated with people, bugs be damned, and its popularity seems to have went on to be a bit of a thorn in Bethesda's side. It's become a measuring stick that Bethesda's Fallouts have been held up to, and for many people, it's set a standard that Bethesda has failed to reach. But it is commendable that Bethesda gave fans what they wanted on this occasion, and handed the series over to some of the older Fallout developers to allow them the chance to make the Fallout 3 they never got to finish. They had to have known at some level that their credibility would be called into question by this, that for many older fans, Obsidian would be seen as the rightful heirs to the series, the ones with the better claim. They had to have known that this move held some risk, but they did it anyway. And I really believe the motivation behind this was to give fans of old what they wanted, and to do right by the series they had taken over. And thank God they did, because it produced Obsidian's arguably best game, as well as what seems to be the most widely loved entry into the Fallout series. Bethesda deserves credit for that. But that credit will only get you so far.
Got a doll baby, I love her so. Nothing else like her anywhere you go. A man she...
Fallout 4 released in 2015, and regardless of what I or anyone else has said, it was a big success, in the one way which matters the most. With 12 million units shipped in just 24 hours after release, it was the biggest entertainment launch of the year, and is one of the best-selling RPGs of all time. When looking at many of the changes Fallout 4 makes, this is the reasoning behind them. To sell that many copies means Fallout 4 has to have broad appeal, it has to match the presentation of other AAA games, and it has to be accessible. For an RPG, the consequences of these changes were severe, but Fallout 4 does make a number of clear improvements. Firstly, the gunplay feels good now. Enemies are still a bit bullet spongy, but they now make attempts to use cover and move about. Guns have more recoil and enemies offer more reaction to being shot. And the increased verticality of the world design introduces more variety to gunfights, which utilise the environmental set pieces well. As a first-person shooter, Fallout has finally transitioned from bad to acceptable, and that makes for a pretty big jump in quality. Efforts have also been made to improve Fallout's other main sore spot, its presentation. Animations have been improved, conversations use varied and dynamic camera angles, and the player's dialogue options are now fully voiced. The visual world design is also more impressive. While not quite as bleak as the third game, Fallout 4's Commonwealth instead offers something far more visually appealing. No longer must the player's eyes look upon an endless sea of grey or brown. Fallout 4 actually makes use of colour. The pastel hues make the environments look much more attractive, but the clever decision to mostly avoid bright shades still allows the wasteland to retain a somewhat sombre feel. Different biomes and levels of urbanization also create a good degree of variety without ever feeling too inconsistent, and the crown jewel of the Commonwealth, the ruined city of Boston, is densely packed and seems to sprawl endlessly, making it Bethesda's most realistic attempt at creating a believable city yet. I also think the designers did a great job at introducing a subtle futuristic look to the city. This is something both Fallout 3 and New Vegas never did, with all of their buildings looking very plain and reminiscent of present day. But this futuristic vibe not only makes sense considering the series' timeline, it also feels stylistically consistent with other aspects of Fallout's visual design. Criticised by some for being technically unimpressive by modern day standards, Fallout 4's world is nevertheless very well crafted from an artistic standpoint, and feels like a real improvement from anything Bethesda has made before. Fallout 4 also adds several new features, like a more fleshed out scavenging and upgrade system, and settlement building. This was one of the most focused on features pre-release. There's something about building a base to call home or getting to express your creative side that appeals to a large number of players. But it's an appeal that doesn't really resonate with me. I've never cared much for fictional homes, and I've built enough foundationally unsound penis-shaped buildings in other games that the novelty has long since lost its luster. From this perspective, I'm happy to admit that settlements just aren't for me, and so it's no surprise that I dislike them. Some people do enjoy this side of the game, and the implementation at least feels as if it has a decent amount of time and effort put into it, so I don't want to criticise settlements too harshly. but I do feel on some level the way in which you can effortlessly build up large and numerous settlements across the wasteland feels a bit at odds with the setting. Like, the settlements of the Fallout series have always seemed as if they're struggling to survive and utilising what they can of the old world because building is so hard now. Now the player can just build anything with a few button presses, and it feels like it devalues what is meant to be a harsh world that is challenging to survive in. They're also quite boring from a gameplay perspective, feeling like they're designed to just waste the player's time, and the main reward for all this time spent settlement building seems to just be access to more Radiant side quests. And if there's one thing Fallout 4 doesn't need, it's more Radiant side quests. In general, Fallout 4's quests aren't very good. Most just send the player to clear one of the many in-game locations. Some quests have had more effort put into them, but now thanks to Bethesda's endless obsession with pure quantity above all else, it's hard to even find the more substantial quests now. Both factions and settlements are designed to produce these repeatable Radiant quests where you do these basic repetitive tasks over and over. These quests are literally endless. They never run out. Hand one in and you get one more. These aren't fun, and they just make finding real quests more difficult. Radiant quests are designed to get the player to continuously go to locations because that's what Bethesda seem to want to design their game around. These locations serve as dungeons. You enter, kill everything inside, loot everything, and sometimes find whatever generic item you need for a quest, or one of the many skill magazines for a small permanent passive bonus. It basically turns the game into a dungeon crawler where you spend all of your time clearing locations, and the new scavenging and upgrade system tried to provide a sense of progression from the items you pick up and recycle. To add to this, randomly generated legendary enemies now spawn at random and drop randomly generated legendary equipment. Worst of all, enemies and loot just respawn after a period of time in-game, even in locations marked as cleared. It works perfectly with the Radiant quest system to give you an endless supply of content, with constant minor upgrades, but I loathe this approach to game design. It takes the worst part of the game and makes it the largest focus, all while making all of the player's actions feel meaningless. What satisfaction can be derived from completing a quest or clearing a location when you know the quests just repeat and the locations just repopulate themselves? It feels like fake content. The sort of thing you'd find in an MMO that was only concerned about giving players more things to do in an attempt to keep them paying a subscription. But this is a single player game, so why has quantity been prioritized so heavily over quality? There are 325 locations in Fallout 4. A lot of effort has went into making them look distinctive and giving them some kind of story to uncover. But how many locations does it take until the core gameplay loop feels repetitive to the point of not being fun? It's a subjective question, it will depend on the player, but for me it was about 10 or 20. And after about 30, I never wanted to play this game again. I would much rather have better designed locations, maybe with some unique puzzles and actually fleshed out stories, but instead each one just feels valueless. One more on an endless list that maybe has something cool in it but probably doesn't. One more place that looks different but still has all the same old enemies to kill and items to pick up as everywhere else. This huge number of dungeons isn't immersive either. Sometimes quantity can lead to a game being more immersive. A larger open world might feel more real, particularly if the open world is meant to represent a fantasy country or real-life city. Fallout 4's never-ending dungeons are the exact opposite. They're all full of raiders and super mutants, and it makes no sense. 90% of this world's population is somehow raiders, so who are these raiders raiding in order to survive? In addition to this, the density of these locations means just around the corner to every tiny defenseless settlement, there's huge bases, each full of an army of well-equipped foes. These enemy-infested dungeons just don't really make any sense in the context of the world. It's been a problem with Bethesda's open-world design since Oblivion, but Fallout 4 sinks to a new low in how unrealistic it all seems. Still, not every quest is Radiant. There is still a large number of fleshed-out side quests, even if they are harder to find. Much like Fallout 3, these offer a range of wacky scenarios that feel just as, if not more ridiculous than in that game. These wacky adventures do offer some genuine entertainment, and they're light years ahead of the Radiant quests. However, compared to New Vegas, these quests offer less choice, less agency, and have worse writing. They're also all self-contained now, which feels like a big step down from the interconnectivity and consequences of Obsidian's design. What really hurts these quests though, is the new dialogue system. This is, without a doubt, Fallout 4's worst sin. Where previous titles have presented the player with full dialogue choices, Fallout 4 switched to a dialogue wheel that only has very abbreviated representatives of what the player character would say. The options presented often feel like they don't give the player enough information to even know what choosing them will do. Worse than this is how little meaning your choices even have. There are now 4 dialogue options in every single situation. This creates an arbitrary limitation for the writers. No situation is ever allowed to have more or less dialogue options, regardless of how much, or as is more often the case, how little they need for choices. To make this even more restrictive, these 4 options are always designed to fit into this archetype of yes, no, maybe / more info, and sarcastic. What does sarcastic do? Really, it just makes you say something obnoxious and dumb, and that's it. Fallout 1 and 2 also often let you say obnoxious things. You can act like an arsehole quite regularly, and it often leads people to just stop talking to you, sometimes permanently, and sometimes they even attack you. It's a bit like real life, where constantly acting like a dick is generally a bad idea. But it's great that the old Fallout still gave you this option, even though it often just gets you into trouble. You are given the choice after all, and that's what RPG should be about, choice. So what about the sarcastic option in Fallout 4? Do people refuse to speak to you ever again? Do they ever attack you? No. You just say something dumb and the conversation continues the exact same way. The maybe and more info options aren't so different. More info gives you a piece of always unneeded information and then sends you back to the same dialogue wheel to pick one of the other 3 options. And maybe just means yes, apparently? So in conversations, you only have 2 real choices. Yes, I will help you, and no, I won't, or just agree and disagree. Often, you don't even have any actual choice, and all 4 options just lead to similar pieces of dialogue, and then the conversation proceeds in a linear fashion. This happens a lot. The 4 options are just fake. At best, they change the flavour of the text a little, but they almost never lead to different outcomes. The concept of choice in conversations is just an illusion, and even the illusion looks pathetic. Also different in Fallout 4 is your protagonist being voiced. I suppose this was inevitable due to the need to keep up to date with modern trends and continually improve presentation. But it really fucking sucks. Having a voiced main character will usually diminish players' ability to roleplay as them, but there are RPGs with voiced protagonists that still work, like The Witcher, Deus Ex, or even Mass Effect. These games give the main character some kind of personality. Even in the case of Commander Shepard in Mass Effect, where you do have quite a large amount of choice and can follow quite different Paragon or Renegade paths, Shepard always comes across as having a personality. He's very determined and eager to get the job done. This trait of being determined is easy for the player to relate to, so it doesn't present a barrier that stops the player from feeling like this is their character. And Shepard also seems fairly likeable. Fallout 4's protagonist is not likeable. They feel like they've been written to be as bland as possible to allow players to still find them relatable. That would be fine if everyone just wanted to roleplay as someone really bland, but I don't think they do. Also, making the main character bland doesn't mean they don't have a personality, it just means their personality is being bland. And thanks to Fallout 4's writing, their personality also seems like it includes lacking intelligence and being annoying. And there is one final personality trait that Fallout 4's protagonist has that is even more of a problem.
Where is my son? Where is Sean?
Caring about their missing son. In Fallout 4, your son is taken from you at the beginning of the game, and the main story focuses on the player trying to find them. Fallout 4's protagonist cares a lot about their son. The problem is for the player, you've only just been introduced to them. Your son is a baby. You have no connection to it, no reason to care. So the fact that your protagonist cares greatly creates a very strong disconnect between you, the player, and your supposed in-game character, and you're reminded of this disconnect constantly throughout the game. A voiced protagonist is never something I would have wanted in a Fallout game, where freedom to create any character you like has always been important. Still, if it had to be included, it could have been done so much better than this. And on the subject of freedom and the ability to create any character you like, character building has also been greatly streamlined. Skills are gone completely, which also means conversation skill checks have also been gutted. Special stats are still here, but what you choose at the start of the game is less important than ever before. Perks have become one per level, but what to choose feels very obvious, as choosing things to help you in combat just seems to make sense in such a ridiculously combat-heavy game. So character building is much more boring and a whole lot simpler. On the bright side, the level up UI looks fantastic. It's very visually appealing while presenting all needed information in an easy to understand way. It really is very well designed, but unfortunately, how good the level up UI looks doesn't exactly make up for the other shortcomings. And then there's the story. And while I'm not exactly a fan, I do think some people might view this aspect of the game a little too harshly. A lot of people are focused on the plot holes of Fallout 4's main quest. There's nothing wrong with pointing out plot holes, but I do think people in general sometimes place too much importance on them. A lot of the time we look for plot holes because something is bad, but things aren't always bad because of plot holes. There are exceptions to this, and this is a complicated subject. But in the case of Fallout 4, I don't think the plot holes so many people have pointed out are quite as bad as people would make them seem, and it's just disliking Fallout 4 for other reasons has meant people have focused on plot holes more than usual. Fallout 4's main story doesn't come across as very realistic, but nothing about Bethesda's Fallouts are especially realistic. I do think there are two big problems with Fallout 4's story though. The first is the complete lack of player agency and choice outside of which faction to side with. The story is very linear. When it wants you to fight someone, you always have to fight them. When it wants you to kill someone, you have to kill them. And when it wants you to act like an idiot, you will have to act like an idiot. And unfortunately, it wants you to act like an idiot quite a lot. For most of the game, you're just a passenger, although Fallout 3 also had this problem. Still, it feels bad for what is meant to be an RPG. Also, if a game is going to tell a linear story, you'd expect a higher level of quality, but it doesn't feel like we get that. The second big problem is the factions. Really, it's just that they're boring. The Minutemen don't even seem like a proper faction. I mean, the only member who does anything is you. It might be okay if it at least felt like your own fake faction, but it doesn't even manage that because despite being made the general, you still have to follow all orders, unquestionably. The Railroad aren't much better. Their problem lies with how the synths are handled, so we'll come back to that topic in a bit. The Brotherhood of Steel are better. I mean, they have this really cool airship, so that's something. Still, ideology-wise, they just seem motivated by power now. The Brotherhood of Fallout 3 was criticised for being portrayed as the good guys, but really the Brotherhood of Fallout 3 felt more accurate to the original games than Fallout 4's blatant fascists. It feels like Bethesda overreacted to criticism and now deliberately made the Brotherhood borderline evil. Still, I suppose the Brotherhood have changed leadership, so it is possible their ideology would change too. It's just that their expansionism and dictatorship-like leadership make them completely unlikable, and neither of those traits were even present in the original game. Then there's the Institute, and I guess we have to go into spoiler territory to talk about them, so if you don't want to have part of Fallout 4's main story spoiled, check the video description for a timestamp to skip ahead. The Institute feel like a big missed opportunity, and they also come across as very inconsistent. All throughout the early game we hear about this sinister organisation who are replacing people with synths for unknown reasons and carrying out evil acts all over the Commonwealth, including killing your spouse and stealing your baby. Honestly, before you meet them, the Institute sounds really interesting. They're mysterious and clearly quite advanced, and through the early game you'll find yourself wondering what the hell is up with these guys, and what kind of messed up shit are you going to find when you finally reach them. And then you do meet them, and they're really boring. I guess they're considered morally grey, but really they just seem to do lots of evil acts, without any actual justification. I guess they just don't think about how killing innocent people is kind of a dick move, or maybe they think anything goes when you have good intentions. But the writing seems to just try to avoid the subject, which makes their ideology feel weak. The Institute neither come across as very believable nor very interesting, and in the end, they don't feel very successful as either a villain or a viable faction choice. Which leads me back to that missed opportunity. Simps are a great idea. They fit well with Fallout's other use of B-movie horror monsters and sci-fi concepts, and they're even foreshadowed in Fallout 3. Still, Fallout 4 hints at this theme of paranoia and trust, but it doesn't do anything with it. And that's such a shame because this is a great theme. A post-apocalypse already creates an environment where trust is difficult as man ends up pitted against man in a fight for survival, and morals begin to decay following the breakdown of society. So by using the concept of, is your neighbour a simp? This inherent distrust could have been dialed up a notch, leading to these poorly held together societies to start breaking down, which the player can then be thrown right into the middle of. Distrust is a really fun idea for a game to play with. The story could have focused on making the player paranoid about who or what they themselves can trust, as well as showing the effect of a breakdown of trust on this world, as settlements close their doors to outsiders and try to root out the imposters within their midst. I think there's so much potential for good quests and interesting stories with this idea, and if this was adopted as a central theme, that theme could have tied the various side quests and locations together, making the overall story feel much more cohesive. Instead, simps are only used as evil killing machines, or they are liberated, meaning they have free will and are emotionally identical to humans, which is about the most boring and simplistic way possible to handle complicated questions of artificial intelligence by this point in time. So Fallout 4 has a main story that gives the player almost no freedom outside of their final faction choice, and then also manages to make each faction uninteresting and unlikable, making that final faction choice feel pretty worthless. Simps were a good concept, but little was done with them. The poorly handled and already greatly limited new dialogue system is terrible. Other RPG systems have been streamlined, and the flaws of Fallout 3 in tone and realism remain. Some new features have been added, but they don't feel like replacements for what's gone, and it's hard not to see Fallout 4 as a bit of a disappointment. It is Bethesda's biggest and best looking open world yet, with endless content and completely acceptable combat. That counts for something, but it's not enough. In many ways, Fallout 4 is still a high quality game. Even the story is hardly the train wreck that some people make it out to be, but personally it has none of the features that I'm looking for in an RPG, and it's not what I want from a Fallout game either. Obviously not everyone falls into the same category as me, but Fallout 4 did see a major pushback from fans, and not just from the older and more jaded members of the Fallout community. For the first time, Bethesda had also truly disappointed the one group they never should have: Bethesda fans. People who like the game design that Bethesda have built their reputation on, but who still didn't think Fallout 4 lived up to its legacy, that it didn't feel like an RPG anymore, that too much was lost and too little was gained, and that the final product felt more like a looter shooter that only paid homage to its role-playing roots. It left some people worried about the future of the series and where it would go next under Bethesda's hands. And then Fallout 76 happened. I'm not going to say much about this game because I haven't actually played it. I considered buying it for the sake of this video, but I didn't want to spend time or money on something that I knew I wouldn't enjoy, just so I could take part in a conversation where everyone is saying the same thing. Fallout 76 is a game that few people seem to have wanted, but far worse than that, it seems to have simply been a bad game. Sometimes I listen to the criticisms of Fallout 76 and feel a strong sense of déjà vu. Apparently, the addition of nuclear bombs to be used as toys devalues the core themes of the setting. But didn't that happen already in Fallout 3? The removal of NPCs means there's no meaningful conversation choices or moral dilemmas, but that just sounds like a more transparent version of the last game. The core gameplay loop is repetitive and time-consuming, but isn't that the way of all Bethesda's games? Still, even if some of these criticisms feel like old news, Fallout 76 still seems to have plenty of its own new sins that are firmly unforgivable. Unprecedented levels of bugs, server instability, and an overpriced cash shop all seem to suggest a new low. I guess the wasteland has once more become a bleak and tragic place, just not for the right reasons. And that's before looking at Bethesda's bold new PR strategy, which seems to revolve around making as many fuck-ups as possible to try and just turn hate into pity or something. Regardless, Bethesda seem to have turned everyone against them, and I think Fallout 76 has left many people wondering, who is this game even for? And just what is Fallout these days?
It's all over, but the crowd.
And so, after maybe a little longer than I intended, we're back to that beginning question. What is Fallout, and what should it be? Over the course of this video, I've tried to show that Fallout clearly is different things to different people. As the series has evolved, its tone has varied greatly, and this started with Fallout 2, before Bethesda even entered the picture. But by this point in time, the feeling and atmosphere of Fallout 1 seem not only lost, but also forgotten. So for me, the wackiness of Fallout 3 and 4 is a clear point of contention, but for a different person, that could easily be one of the main features they want to see in Fallout. Personally, I'd like to see future Fallouts return to being bleak and depressing, but I'm sure changes like this would not only turn many people off, but also strike some people as being decidedly not Fallout. This is true for other parts of the game as well. Take world design. It seems an open 3D world is here to stay, but there's a big difference in how it was handled in New Vegas compared to Fallout 3 or 4. And as years of Fallout 3 versus New Vegas rivalry makes pretty clear, there are people who feel strongly over both approaches. Different people want different things, but if there is one thing which I think fans broadly agree on, it's that mainline Fallout games should continue to be RPGs. The backlash over some of the changes in Fallout 4 makes this pretty clear. The vast majority of Fallout fans don't just want to explore a post-apocalyptic world, they want to roleplay in it. And I hope, at the very least, that Bethesda understand that. And as for who should Fallout appeal to, and who should Bethesda listen to, well, it's important to remember who Fallout belongs to. It's not the founders, or the old school diehards, or the Bethesda fanboys. It's Bethesda themselves. And as much as you may personally dislike that, it isn't going to change. So who should Bethesda listen to? Well, hopefully a lot of people, but maybe most important of all is themselves. I've often struggled to understand what exactly Bethesda's vision for the series is, but they must have one. And I don't mean the marketing executives who just want to maximize profit, I mean the writers and the developers who spend years of their lives working on these games. So what do they want Fallout to be? Fallout has gotten to the point of mainstream success where you cannot satisfy everyone. But the only way to make a truly great game is to make the game you really want to make. And maybe Bethesda have actually spent too long looking at the past and trying to please fans. It seems worth pointing out again that the creators of Fallout 1 took inspiration from a huge range of post-apocalyptic influences. The ideology behind the Brotherhood of Steel was inspired by the book A Canticle for Leibowitz. The look of the world drew a lot from Mad Max. The art design of the robots came from the movie Forbidden Planet. Fallout does seem like an amalgamation of themes and styles and ideas, and there's lots of untapped sources out there. But Bethesda seem to have focused solely on looking inwards. Everything that featured in the old games just reappears, even those that don't belong like Jet, or those with no real purpose like the Enclave in Fallout 3. So maybe it's time to stop holding on so closely to the past. If the Fallout 1 team had the freedom to draw inspiration from anything they chose, and Bethesda can only draw inspiration from the games which came before, I know which team I'd rather be a part of. And really, maybe the sacred symbols of the Fallout franchise don't need to be worshipped so closely either. Not everything has some hugely important origin. The blue and yellow jumpsuits are only those colours because in the game's original colour palette, those two colours were the only ones not being used. The tagline, "War Never Changes," was hastily written by Tim Kaine. It's not even a very good tagline for the series, But if a tagline does need to remain just for the sake of brand recognition, it really doesn't need to be repeated so much, and the frequent use of it in Fallout 4 is infuriating. Then there's stuff like using power armor for the cover art. It doesn't really make each game stand out, and I'm pretty sure there's only so many ways you can angle a T-51 helmet anyway. New Vegas didn't use power armor, and it has a better cover art than any other Fallout game. I know that some things are very marketable, and certain icons aren't going away. I mean, how else are you going to sell your Nuka-Cola clothesline and replica Vault Boys? But not everything needs to appear constantly. People place too much value on the little things, and the excessive use of the same icons and brands just feels like merchandise-fueled fanservice. When Fallout 4 released and didn't include an opening narration from Ron Perlman, people complained, and I knew Bethesda would bring him back in the next game. And they did. Fallout 76 comes with a Ron Perlman voiced opening. And are you happy now? Or do you realise that stuff like this doesn't actually matter? A bad game is still bad even if it has Ron Perlman, and a good game isn't made good by his inclusion. So if you do want Bethesda to stop throwing in so much fan service, well, maybe people need to stop acting like fans that need to be constantly served. And as for retcons, well, retcons are dangerous territory, but they're not forbidden territory. If you want to complain about retcons, pick your battles wisely. Does it really matter that Jet is in Fallout 3 and 4? I've heard so many people complain about how this inconsistency is a major plot hole, but I hate to break it to you. Fallout 2 contradicts its own Jet story when Bishop's wife tells you she got addicted to it years before its inventor had even been born. Oops. Sometimes lore inconsistencies will happen, and to some degree people should accept that. Which is not to say there aren't truly egregious examples, like how Fallout 4 made ghouls no longer age or need food and water, just for an incredibly stupid side quest. This isn't just something quite major, but it's not even consistent within the world of Fallout, as you hear about other ghouls needing to eat food. Also, don't act like any retcon is a huge travesty just by virtue of being a retcon. You know what else is a retcon within the Fallout series? The Vault experiments. Originally, Vault experiments weren't a part of the lore, and if they weren't added, we'd never have got some of the best moments from Fallout 3 and New Vegas. So if fans are going to give feedback and complain about the series, they should try to make sure the feedback they give is good, and that they complain about the right things. There's so much noise generated by a community as large as Fallout has become, and it's important that the things which truly matter don't get drowned out. Finally, Bethesda will never be able to do it all and perfectly please everyone. But just some advice. You can get away with a hell of a lot more when your game feels objectively well made and is successful in its own goals. If Bethesda do have some vision, whatever it may be, they better do it well, because there's only so many Fallout 76s a company can get away with before you will forever lose not only your fans' goodwill, but also their money. And as big and successful as Fallout may have grown to be, its future isn't guaranteed. Just like the pre-war world of Fallout's alternative history, it doesn't matter how big you grow or how prosperous things seem. Through greed and hubris, it can all come crashing down around you, quicker than you might expect. Really, that is the true lesson of post-apocalyptic fiction, and I hope Bethesda isn't blind to its warnings. This video was very hard work. I guess this is when people usually ask for you to support their Patreons or do stuff on social media, but I don't have any of that stuff. Nevertheless, it has been almost exactly 1 year since I started this channel, and while it feels a little strange to actually say out loud, I guess I do have some actual fans now. And if you watched all this video and still haven't clicked off, there's a good chance that's you. And so I wanted to say thank you. I know I don't get many views or have many subscribers, And if I understand the algorithm correctly, this video, which took me absolutely ages to make, probably won't get many views. But despite my very limited success, I've really enjoyed making videos this past year. I know I don't speak directly to my audience very often, but I hope that doesn't make it seem like I don't care, because I really do. It means a lot to me. Every comment, every like, every person just taking the time to listen to my opinions. It really does mean a lot, and I am very grateful.